Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Down But Not Out, the show where founders tell their real life stories of entrepreneurial resiliency. I started this show after my one company, VisitorQ, was dealt a death blow by Google that led to us almost losing all of our clients and all of our revenue. And that would have happened if it wasn't for the hard work, determination, and resiliency of our team. I love a good underdog. So these stories resonate more with me than the story of the $1 billion exit or the story about how your company IPO'd. These are stories of grit meant to inspire you, the listener, to keep fighting. As entrepreneurs and business owners, we will have our backs against the wall multiple times. So let hearing these stories be your fight song, your hoorah, that thing that gets you out of bed on those tough days. This episode is brought to you by my company, VisitorQ. Identify the anonymous companies visiting your website so your sales team can follow up with them. Start your 14-day free trial at visitorq.com. Now, let's dive into this episode. Today, I'm joined by David Billson. David has over 20 years as an entrepreneur under his belt, having started several successful companies throughout his career. His love for technology and storytelling led to the creation of his creative agency, rTraction, in 2001, which has worked with several hyper-successful brands and is a certified B Corp. He is also the co-founder of the RH Accelerator, which in just 2 years has invested in 16 startups across Canada and Southwestern Ontario specifically to help them and the ecosystem grow. Outside of these ventures and a number of other ones he currently has on the go, David is a father, husband, sci-fi lover, and a creative thinker. David, thanks for being on the show. Are you ready to share your Down But Not Out story?
Do it. Excited to be
Awesome.
here.
All right, perfect. I'm sure I did an okay job at the intro, but why don't we give you the chance to give an intro to yourself for the audience?
Yeah, I think you encapsulated it fairly well in the beginning there. One of the interesting, maybe founding stories. We won't necessarily get too much into it, but my creative agency, rTraction, was actually founded out of a down and out moment. The organization I worked for actually went under in the tech burst in 2001, and the group that was together had sort of a choice to go out and look for jobs together or create a new company together and try to stick together. That's how the company was founded. I've been doing this for 20 years. Kind of got into it a little, through one of those moments where you kind of have to pivot and decide what you're going to do. So went from one day being an employee to the next day, almost overnight, becoming a business owner because of sort of what's happening in the market. So it's been an interesting ride for the past 20 years for sure.
Awesome.
So I guess
And
I should mention I started in software development and learned over the years if you have a great technical product but the usability is not great, then nobody's going to use it. And then the next extension of that was if you have great technology that looks good but nobody knows about it, then it's going to fail as well. So really have gone from software development to UI UX, really interested in that, and now into the marketing side and helping organizations tell their story and so that people can find out about the product or service.
yeah, and knowing you personally, I know you do a great job at the storytelling side, and you are quite the storyteller. And you have a bunch of stuff on the go, as I mentioned, but your down but not out story is really related around rTraction. So could you tell us a bit more about rTraction leading up to that moment?
Yeah, so our Traction's always had a good history of growth. So previous to 2013, 2014, we had about 20 to 30% year over year growth as an agency. We started off with 4 people from that falling out of the original company that went bankrupt. The 4 of us kind of stuck together and built something and experienced good growth year over year. And then we did a lot in the local region. I built a pretty good reputation here in the city for web technology, online marketing, design, that kind of stuff. And then we ended up getting a large contract with Disney ABC Television, which sort of rocket shipped us. And I know you have some other questions coming into that. We've always been really kind of focused on a mix of business, nonprofit, charity, and the for-profit business side. It's usually been, and until Disney kind of came into the picture, around 60 to 70% of our business was actually in the nonprofit charitable sector place. So that's sort of where our roots are, and that's where we found strength, sort of even in rebuilding. Is It's a remarkable client base and a great group of organizations to work with. So historically, we kind of had this mix of working with marketing communications for nonprofits and charities, small businesses, and then we ended up through a random connection getting a large contract with Disney ABC Television. So there's a kind of a splitting point in the rTraction story. There's before 2012, 2013 is when we really started to take off with Disney. They started off with a client with us in 2008, but we're a fairly minor client, and then we ended up doing a major project with them in 2012. So that's kind of a demarcation, and then there's the post Disney rTraction as well, which I'm sure we'll get into a little bit more. Which has returned a little bit more to its roots, which is working with nonprofits and charities and social purpose businesses. And I guess we'll probably uncover why we think it's important to work with social purpose businesses as we go through the narrative of what I think helps you survive a cataclysmic event.
Okay, so we have this path from starting in 2001, growing as a creative agency, and the traditional approach of
I would say
growth of a creative.
typical, yeah, repeat
but
business.
you guys, you had a niche of who you like to work with and what you like to do, and then you have this large client come in, Disney, and they ramp up your agency fairly rapidly, right?
Yeah.
More aggressively than how you were growing previously.
Yeah.
And then what happened with that? Like where was that fall off? And where was that kind of down but not out moment?
Yeah, it was so with Disney, it was interesting. One of the employees that we had hired came into my office one day. And he said, "Would you like to work with Disney ABC Television?" Because previous to that, he had been a freelancer, and he had a friend that worked with the Disney Corporation, and they were looking for some help maintaining a web property. So, of course, like any good entrepreneur, I said, "Sure, sounds great." And
not turning down Disney,
taking them on. No, I think. And we can maybe unpack this a little bit later. I think now maybe I would question about how it fits with what we want to build in the agency. But in my younger days, growing revenue and growth for growth's sake was a little bit more, not important, but definitely on my mind. So we're growing. We were trying to be London's largest tech company, so it made sense to onboard them for sure. And then we built up a great relationship with them over 3 or 4 years of helping maintain an existing property that had been built by somebody else, and then we had the opportunity to build some new software with them. At that point, we were probably 12, 13 people, and over the next 2.5 years, largely fueled by that contract, we grew to about 40 people. And then any agency owner who's had a large client will also tell you a very similar story. You can try to differentiate, or what's the right word? When you split off your revenues, I can't think of the word, but you have different revenue lines. You can try to protect yourself from having this one large client. But at the same time, when you have this one large client, they consume a lot of the resources and attention of your senior leadership to keep them on site. So it's really hard to get different lines of revenue in. So even though we knew it was really dangerous to have a large client representing such a large share of our revenue, at times it was 60 to 70%. We couldn't find the time and energy to get on board enough clients to sort of offset that. And then, of course, as a lot of these stories go, at one point, the large corporations decisions are often made way up the decision-making tree. So Disney, they had mandatory expense cuts across all departments, and our project got caught up in that and was canceled. So within about 3 months, we had notice. We went from what would close to $3 million worth of revenue as an agency to suddenly looking at how we get to 800,000 in revenue, and that was the drop that we were looking at within 3 months of time. It was pretty significant.
Yeah. Hearing this is, I think, the most detail I've had about the story, but I think it's giving me a bit of PTSD and a bit I can only imagine that Do you remember how you felt when you got that call or that
Oh
email? I
yeah.
remember mine, the feeling of
Yeah.
mine as well. Yeah.
Well, I had actually just come off a like a little mini paternity leave. So I had 3 weeks off when my daughter was born, and came in on the Monday, and everything was great. And then Tuesday, I got the call from Disney saying that they needed to make the decision. Ironically enough, before the baby was born, I had flown out to LA to Burbank, where they are, just to make sure, because I knew, when you have a new baby, you're a little bit out of the loop. So just make sure everything was good with the relationship, and get the next planning done and things like that. So everything was fine. And I think it was March I went out there, and then June uh, was when I got the call saying that the contract was going to be canceled. So even doing best practices, get the FaceTime with the client, go out there. It's still so it was definitely a shock. And I remember, it's interesting because I remember saying to a couple of the team at the time, we had, 40 staff, and we had actually open job positions. We were hiring, we were growing, and we were growing outside of Disney as well. Um, so we had a pretty aggressive growth plan that we just launched to get to 60 people because we felt that that was sustainable. And I remember sitting down with a colleague and saying, like, I can't see us surviving with more than 8 people sort of by the end of this is done. And I think if you were to track where we went to the low staff mark, we we're probably pretty close to that over 3 or 4 years. Because I think our payroll was 250,000 a month at the time. And yeah, you're looking down to, okay, I can see a line of sight to 80,000 in revenue. The other challenge you have in growth, somebody gave me this analogy. It might have been Joe Dale's, one of the co-founders of the RH Accelerator. But one of the challenges with the company, so you think of your company visitor queue is a certain size right now. You can think of it as a balloon, um, and you can expand that balloon by blowing air into the balloon, and the balloon gets bigger and bigger, 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 and
Yep.
then you have an crap moment. And then you can take the air out of the balloon, but to a certain extent, the balloon is bigger. Just you can't actually get it back down to the size that it was
Yep.
before you started expanding it. And that reality became real as well. So as we've grown, we've usually been pretty responsible with our what we call the G&A expenses, the non-labor expenses, and it was roughly 15 to 20% each year of our overall expenses. When this happened, the best we've been able to get to is around 40 to 50% of our G&A, because we just have so much infrastructure,
Yeah. To
leasehold, and
support all those
to
employees
support
that you
the
had.
people,
Yeah.
desks, and things like that. So even when you're looking at, okay, in a service agency, you say, okay, well, your revenue is sort of fixed to the people. That was true except for that balloon factor as well. So we had a huge amount of infrastructure that we had to kind of take apart piece by piece. So it was a long, arduous process. We'd also taken on, in the expansion and growth, working capital loans from BDC, and they're a great organization. Really helped the organization grow. We couldn't have grown into the amount of revenue we did without their support, but now that was part of the infrastructure legacy that we had, that was built on the assumption of increased and continuing revenue growth. That now suddenly we're in a position where we're going to see a revenue decline. So all of those things mixed in is like, oh God. I think one of the saving graces was, I'd pretty much not taken on any debt or anything that had personal guarantees. So other than the BDC had a small personal guarantee, that was a sort of a saving grace. Was okay, at least I'll be okay, my family will be okay, and the employees will be okay. So really it became about how do we take care of our customers through that. If you're going to survive this type of event, your customers become key. Disney was one of them too. It was a longer, took I think 2 years to formally sort of wind down the relationship to the point that it ended. And just really focusing on customers and our staff and making sure that they were comfortable. We did a town hall meeting where we shared the news, and it was one of those moments that I wish I could better articulate what the challenges were, because I think some people took my messaging the wrong way. But I basically said to the staff, it's going to be a really crappy ride. Like I can't sugarcoat this. It's going to be really difficult. It's going to be hard. I think we can meet the challenge. I think we can make it through. But if any of the if any of you want off the boat, no hard feelings. I'll be a reference for you. I'll, support you in any way I can. Some people took that as, I wanted them to quit, which wasn't what I was trying to communicate. I was trying to
Yeah.
communicate, if this is not going to, it's going to be rocky. It's going to be tough. It's going to be a tough slog. If that's not in your DNA, then I'll totally support you sort of jumping off ship. So that I remember that meeting was really hard, sharing the news with the staff, because up until then, we'd won business of the year. We were, if you worked at rTraction, you were at one of, if not one of the largest, then at the time, one of the largest tech companies in the city. We were doing some amazing things. We were doing a lot of support in the community. So it's like almost everyone's kind of collective story of self and where you work and what type of company you work for kind of got shattered all in one blow. So it was hard for staff. It was obviously hard for the owners. Um, and I think we mostly firewalled that stress from our customers, which I think was a success. So the existing customers weren't impacted from a service delivery perspective, which I credit our team for. And that's ultimately focusing on the customers and the ones that we did have as part of what pulled us through.
Yeah, you mentioned a few things there that I kind of want to appeal to: scaling up versus scaling down, and it being almost as equally as hard, right? People always mention how hard it is to scale up, but I think most entrepreneurs that shoot for the moon and take those shots, right? They will likely have to scale down at some point as well in order to take a few steps back, in order to take those steps forward that they want to. So I think that's an important lesson for the listeners and for people that are starting a business. Is yes, it's hard to scale up, but scaling down is equally as hard, if not harder, because you have all that infrastructure in place, and now you have to support it somehow, and you have a portion of the revenue. And the other part there is protecting your current clients. I think that's good, and that they didn't see the fallout. And I think that's a great lesson for everybody as well, because what I kept telling myself when I was in that moment as well, and we only lost 20% of revenue. So, but what I was saying is, hey, we're still it's better than zero. It's better than going back down to zero, right? We've all started at zero. We know what that's like. We know it sucks. So anything better than zero, or anything above zero, is better, right? And protecting your clients as you go through that moment is the existing clients and the revenue you can. Don't throw that away just because you're mad or you're upset and you're in a hole because of this other issue. So I think that's incredibly valuable as well. And then tell me a bit about where you guys are now and what you're doing now towards recovering and your employees. And
I think, for me, one of the lessons learned was, our rTraction had a certain connection. So interestingly enough, pretty much anyone we hired during the Disney phase, growth phase, is not with us anymore. And a lot of the people that started with us sort of in 2008, 2009 are still with us. So it's kind of been an interesting, it's almost like back to the same company we were. There's a few notable changes, but I would say, if we looked at rTraction in 2009, 2010, we almost have the same staff as we did back then. So what, I learned through that is, the people that were in for the ride, the people that were there really believed in the purpose of rTraction that you mentioned, in the onboarding. We're a certified B Corp, which really looks at taking care of all of our stakeholders, including our staff, customers, vendors, the community, etc. So people that believed in that type of mission were the ones that were willing to stick it through, and even through some tough times. There was impact on staff. There's definitely some increased stress on their behalf. So really for us, it was focusing on, okay, what is the purpose of rTraction? Why do we start this? It really goes back to wanting to create stronger communities and build better communities. And you can see that, there's some overlap with the other business, RH Accelerator, that you're familiar with. I'm really about building stronger communities. I like connection. I like helping people to grow. I like people to become, the best versions of themselves. Like, how can we help founders? How can we help in our rTraction side? How can we help customers tell their stories better, to reach more in nonprofits, reach more donors, reach more community members, reach more stakeholders? Because I really like a strong, vibrant community. I think we as humans do better when we're in a strong community. I think we do better when we have great social connections and personal connections. That's what really fuels me at the end of the day. And I think people felt that through the business. They felt connected to the business. And I think our clients who have stuck with us over the years through thick and thin have also, believe in that purpose. So for me, it was figuring out and we're still working on articulating the perfect like why statement, but doubling down on that purpose. The other thing actually is I have to credit you a little bit with, I think, was listening more to Nathan Lackey's podcast, and started really thinking about how do you build up recurring revenue in a service agency?
Yep.
Because the worst thing about a service agency is the lumpiness. So you get a great quarter where you close $300,000 worth of projects. You're like, yay, let's get to work. Let's hire some people. And then the next quarter you sell 20,000. You're like, oh no, we like have to lay a bunch of people off or whatever. So for me, it's looking at how do we transform our attractions business model to be a little bit more like a software as a service or a service model. So we're looking at really focusing on like a shared services model for nonprofits and charities, where whatever the problem is, they can come to us and we'll figure it out. If they need help with accounting, they need help with obviously the digital marketing piece is where we have our in-core staff. If they need help with their IT, like just come to us and we'll help you regardless, even if it's not inside our attractions wheelhouse. We'll find the right vendor. You need leads, we'll connect you to Visitor Queue.
There you
Those
go.
types of things. Really focusing on that sector, that social purpose sector, because that's where we find we have the most success and get the most energy. So like that's what is fueling our next stage of growth. And I think we'll be back. COVID's put a weird spin on everything. We had a great start to 2020, and then we kind of slid into the muck a little bit over the summer, and now we're back to I think some really exciting growth. But with Canada vaccine rollout, where we're at right now in April of 2021, I'd say if it wasn't for the COVID asterisk, I'd say we'll probably have a great year. I'm still shooting for that, but I will settle for a good year.
Yeah.
Given
Like most of us,
on.
right? Yeah. We got to count ourselves lucky that we're not in an industry that's very hard hit, right? We running the businesses we do are very fortunate. And that's what I keep telling myself. VQ slowed down as a result of it as well. It's a tech company where everyone works from home, right? It shouldn't be as effective as these other industries, and we were affected, but you just count yourself lucky you weren't one of the hard hit ones, right?
What are our favorite clients is Science North up in Sudbury, and they have in-person events. They have in-person education as part of the curriculum. They have the IMAC, and so just trying to help them navigate. They're like, okay, we're open this week. Oh wait, we're not, and like so that even that this is an example how we can be impacted. Is our clients are just whiplashed. They don't know whether they should be working on their events system or they should be in their online instruction platform. We help with both projects, but like those are so our clients are the ones that are we can like do our jobs pretty fully remotely, but what our clients need and where their needs are sort of thrashing wildly, which is kind of where that translates into some uncertainty for us, for sure.
I think my favorite part about your story is that rTraction was really the main focus for a while there, for 20 years, give or take. I know you had your side projects, 20 years, and you had your other projects that you were working on, and then the Disney event happened, and we know that rTraction was hard hit by that. But it's almost like you learned a lesson, and we'll get into lessons in a bit, but to kind of not all your eggs in one basket, because now you have a great growing accelerator that is doing great things for the ecosystem, and I'm sure will benefit you guys in the future. You have rTraction at a steady spot where it is now, and I know you're doing a bunch of other things in the community. You have your other software product. Is it G'day?
G'day, yeah.
Right?
Yep.
G'day. Yep. So I like how you've learned from the lesson of having one big fish, one big client can hurt, and you felt that pain, and now you've spread out your assets, you've spread out your time in order to protect against something like that happening again.
I think one of the key lessons there that I think other founders can maybe take away is that was a cataclysmic event, that we experienced. Should have been an extinction level event, losing 60-70% of your revenue almost overnight. But because of our team and because of our clients, we were able to make it through. And I would say, one of the reasons that the RH Accelerator was founded, from my perspective, was we actually had extra resources that, we had 40 desks from the rTraction days that we just were sitting empty. So that was one of the initial conversations with Brian and Joe was, we got the space, we've got these desks, we've got these, I've got monitors, like I've got
Yeah.
40 workstations that we're just not using. How do we leverage those assets to do something new? And looking back on it, I think RH Accelerator is going to have a huge impact in our region. I think it's going to have a huge impact in certain industry back sectors. And who knows, maybe Brian and Joe would have founded it without me. Maybe we still would have found a way to cross paths. But I think if I was still managing a 60, 70 person agency, there's no way that I would have the bandwidth or energy or even desire to kind of look at something like
Yeah.
RH Accelerator. So those are sometimes those kicks in the face, the forced pivots, the down moments where you have to be really creative of, okay, I got a space. How do I monetize it? How do I put it to work for me? Is one of those moments that created the RH Accelerator. So, and I think, if you look back 10 years from now, I think I will be very grateful that the RH Accelerator existed as part of my ecosystem. Now, if you told me that when Disney first pulled the plug on the project, I may not have appreciated it. Well, 10 years, you'll be fine. You'll actually look at this as a great thing that happened to you. But I actually truly believe that in 10 years, I will look back and say, thank God that happened, because I think our community's stronger with the RH Accelerator in place. I think I'm stronger. I think I have a better, portfolio and a better, impact job. I'm happier than if I had been managing, an outsourced agency for Disney, right? So those are it took 3 years and a lot of hard nights and hard days to get through. But at the end of the day, I think I will say that, no, I'm glad that it happened. I'm not there yet.
I can see it already for you. I think outside
think
looking in, it's easier. Yeah. Outside looking in, it's definitely easier for me to see that it was not a good thing, because I never want to wish that upon somebody, right? Yeah. But I think it was a positive, I guess, in a way. You could turn it into a positive, and I think the point I want to make is that entrepreneurs do that, right? They get punched in the face. They have this event that happens, and then they use the resources that are left over, maybe in that downscale, like we were talking about, or what have you, to turn it into something else. And I've seen a lot of great entrepreneurs do it. And that's what usually separates the two from a good entrepreneur to a great entrepreneur, is when they're down, they're out, they find a way to use the resources that they have in order to spin up something new or create that new revenue stream they need to in order to keep going.
The other thing I'd add too is I had a lot of people reach out to me when I was going through the challenges of just sort of trying to get everything structured and set up for success. How many stories I heard from other entrepreneurs or second generation entrepreneurs that had inherited the family business about how the original family business was nothing to do with what they're doing now. They went through a similar kind of process and pivot. So I think as you explore this podcast, I just thought of another guest I'll let you know that you should have on the show. It is a very common story. So when you have your oh crap moments, just know that it could be the birth of something that's new and better.
Yeah.
That won't necessarily save you in the moment, but it's interesting.
Yeah. I think right along that thought, and the thing that drew me to this book the most was that it tells this story, right? The hard thing about hard things. Yeah. It literally tells a story of the resilience, the pivoting, the tenacity it takes to be an entrepreneur and to make it through. And actually, when I was going through Google change, that I had to re-listen to the book, because it helped me get up in the morning. It helped me find the courage to get the team going and to get the team motivated again when I was just exhausted, right? Too many hours, not enough reward out of it, and I was feeling burnt out. So I think there's lessons in those moments, and you need to ensure that you're looking at the resources you have available, as that's where you're going to find your pivot. You look at what you have, and that'll be where you find your next step. So I guess to wrap up a bit, was there a point in time you considered quitting? I think it's a good question, because somebody might be going through this moment and be considering it, or maybe you didn't.
Oh no, I frequently. And I think there's two things that kept me going. One, as I mentioned, there was a small personal guarantee from BDC. It was something we could have absorbed as a family. It was not an experience that we wanted to go through. Two was that, the team that's still with me today is the team that, was with me in 2006, 2007. So I really felt if they were with me, then it was worth trying to grind through. And then I do like, the customers really, the customers we do have are amazing, and I love working with them. So it was a combination of, okay, I hate the decisions I have to make today. I hate the decisions that I'm going to do, but I love the business. I did try it. We almost got bought. There was an organization that was looking to expand into Ontario, and they wanted a surplus of development, which we had. So I probably would have taken any offer at that point, just to not go through the dismantling of the team. If I could have kept the big team together, at its 30 40 person mark, because we had an awesome team, I would have done that. So I would have considered that. I did consider just throwing in the towel multiple times. But ultimately, there was a little bit of financial incentive mixed in with the no, like, we can do this. I think in hindsight, I don't know if it was the right decision to make or not. I think there was a lot of energy that could have been put into something new or different. And I'm happy that I made the decision that I did, if that makes sense. Like,
Yep.
it's been 4 years, because then once we had entangled Disney, then we had to deal with our banking relationships that were, the ratios were all out of whack, because everything was signed at 2 million plus in revenue. Now we're at 600,000. So we just, the numbers didn't work with the banks. So then we had to deal with them. And then, and then we come out of that and everything's fine. And then COVID hits. So it's been, we're probably coming up to 5 years. I think it's 2016 June, when I first got the call from Disney saying, hey, we're going to have to start to slow things down. So it's been 5 years of really daily grind battles.
Yep.
And again, I think it's one of those, in 5 years, I'll look back and say, thank I did that, but I'm still in that. It's still a fight to get that agency back up and stable. But we're
Yep.
90% of the way there. Like, you can now see the light, proverbial light at the end of the tunnel. And sometimes I do wonder, okay, what could I have been doing in those 5 years that could have maybe been a better use of my time and energy? And those, you don't have a crystal ball. So again, sometimes when talking to entrepreneurs such as yourself, I say sometimes your past self and your future self can be really handy tools. So I try to connect with, okay, what is David Billson going to think 5 years from now?
Yep.
5 years from now, I think every decision I'll make, I'll say, no, that was the right, it was a good call to keep rTraction going. It was a good call to start the accelerator. Yeah, it sucked for you at the time, but I think you made the right decision. And then also anchoring back to what, past self would say, 5 years previous, like, no, you need to make this work. You need to figure it out for your customers. So, like, connecting to past and future selves is sort of an interesting exercise sometimes to think about, okay, what am I going to think about this in the future? Because I know there's another entrepreneur I've been talking to in the community that has a difficult decision ahead. And I think and I say, like, well, if you think about either path, 5 years from now, you'll be happy with that decision, I think. And sometimes I think it's good to kind of walk down those paths when you're forced with a difficult decision, and realize either way you'll be okay
Yep.
when you look back. So that's kind of what, I don't know if that made sense in the context of your question, but
No, yeah, I think that's important that people get caught up, and it might.
in the
It
moment,
sounds like
you're
you're
just
caught up
in
in
the
it.
moment.
You have the anxiety of what is my future self really gonna? Is that the best potential for me in the future? But I think you're right. Looking back 5 years, any decision you make that is progression in some way, you'll look back and say that was the correct decision.
Yeah,
I think that sums up what you were saying, and I think
absolutely.
it's an important lesson, and one that uh, I get anxiety about. What in a year from now, am I working hard enough? Am I making the right decision today that in a year from now I'm going to be happy with where I am? And every year I've looked back, I haven't been like, oh, I wasted a year's worth of work. I've been
Yeah,
happy with it. So consider that you might have anxiety about the future, but you probably won't have the regret looking back, because you put in the time, you put in the work, and you made some progress. And like I said, again, some progress is better than no progress, right?
absolutely. I remember, as again, Joe Dales, at one point I was thinking about, looking into like an MBA kind of thing. He's like, dude, you've been running your own business now for, I think, probably at the time 10 years. You've already got the MBA. So sometimes I look at those moments too as education moments.
Yep.
Okay, I don't know, the MBA at Ivy is 130 grand or something. Now it's like, okay, I learned a very expensive lesson, but maybe cheaper than than at the trying to spend a year doing an MBA, right? So those are two. Like when you make mistakes or you make a bad decision, that's going to happen. But what do you learn from it? How do you make a better decision next time as an entrepreneur, as a leader? Because there is really, there's accelerators like the RH Accelerator, but ultimately, so much of the entrepreneurial journey has to be a learned decision, a learned process where you learn how you make decisions, how you, Nick, make decisions is going to be different than how I, David, make decisions.
Yeah.
And learning when you make good ones and make bad ones. And there's no way through that except to do it, right? So I think that's the other thing too, is even if you can look back and say, boy, that was a bad decision. Well, what did you learn from that decision? Because that makes you a better, more experienced entrepreneur next time, because you will face a similar type of decision next week, next year, 5 years from now. And if you can learn from that, then that's going to put you, in a better class of entrepreneurs. And unfortunately, I don't think there's any way to do that but through experience. So that's the other thing too, is like when I fail, is thinking about, okay, what did I learn? And I think of, you've seen that with me sometimes when you've missed a goal. Okay, what did you learn from it? As long as you learn something from it, I think it's fine. I think, we want to set a high targets for ourselves and try to achieve those objectives. But I always think of startups, especially, or growth stage companies, as learning mechanisms. So you have to be constantly learning about what your customers want, constantly learning how to hire onboard staff, constantly learning how to build a great culture, and learning only comes from making mistakes as well. So,
for context for everybody, when David's saying my goals and him being upset with me for missing them, David's an investor in Visitor Q. So,
yes.
So that's where that comes from, and sharing our goals with our shareholders. And a lot of the times I don't hit them because I stretch them. And then when I do hit them, I'm upset with myself because I didn't stretch them far enough. And there's one more thing I want to unpack. Getting a day job for anyone that's quitting, being a founder and getting a day job. I think it's important to understand if you're someone that can now go back to, like you're saying, you've been an entrepreneur for 10 years. It taught you more than going to get an MBA or going back to school. But I've talked to other entrepreneurs, whether they're being acquired or they're in that stage where they're like, I'm going to give up, yada, yada, yada. I'm going to go get a day job. And okay, are you going to be happy in that day job after this? Are you going to be able to do that day job and not be selfish to that corporation? Like you don't want your employees to be, right? Get the job and mosey along through it. So understand that coming out of your most recent venture or at that point of quitting, is that an actual option, right? For you to go get a day job? Would you be happy doing that? I think that's the big caveat there, and ensuring that you're going to be happy and you're going to make a real contribution to that corporation. I was talking to another entrepreneur, and we were talking. He's at a point where he might get acquired, and he said they want me to stick around. And I said, how long are you going to last if you have to stick around? He said maybe a year. I'm like, I could do a year as well. Mm-hmm. Beyond that, I think I would have an itch. My thing is, I need to be at the point of, I think, still figuring myself out a bit. I'm still at the youth part of my career and my journey as an entrepreneur. But I think what drives me is that unlimited potential. I don't like to be capped. I don't like to be capped in my potential and my future growth. I like to have that unlimited possible potential. So in the corporation, obviously, and working for someone else, that might be that'll likely be capped in what you can do and how far you can grow. So I think that's an important lesson that I derived and that I want to pass on, is that ensuring that you're able to go back to that 9 to 5 or that working for someone else, if that's something you're considering.
Yeah, I think for me, what differentiates sort of an entrepreneur or founder from an employee is being able to, the ones that do it successfully are able to take accountability. So to the extent that I think part of the reason being a founder, being a CEO, being a top level leader is so hard, is ultimately at the end of the day, everything's your fault. So even if it's like, well, the currency moved, 30 points overnight and I wasn't expecting the US currency to crash. Well, you're the one that decided to not hedge your currency, right? So like everything in the organization becomes your fault. So I think, making the leap back into regular job space is, two things. One, can you handle not being the one to make decisions? And two, are you willing to play the accountability game? Because in a corporation or a large structure that you're not at the top of, there's multiple different, complexities with accountabilities and responsibilities. And entrepreneurs are often the type to say, I'm just going to do it because I see a clear path. I'm just going to do it, get out of my way.
Yeah.
And a lot of corporations have brakes on that for potentially good reasons, that can make it really challenging for that type of personality to do that. So I think the skill sets and problem solving in entrepreneurship are invaluable. I think we have a little bit of a bad reputation for being poor employees once we own our own business, and I think it's because of that. You can, as a business owner, you can just decide to go do something,
Yeah.
um, and I think we probably, like, I could see if I landed back in corporate land, where I would struggle is not following proper procedures or authorizations, because I'm just going to go solve a problem because that's what I do. I'm a
You're
natural
too
born problem
creative.
solver.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it just, and then getting frustrated when I get in trouble because it's like in math class, I would always have the right, or frequently have the right answer, but not show my work. And I would lose marks for not showing my work. And I would get frustrated with the teacher and be like, well, why does it matter? I got the right answer. Right. So I think you can draw a pretty much straight line to that. To entrepreneurship, ultimately, you're like, nobody cares about your I mean, if you're getting acquired, maybe, but ultimately, you're judged on your income statement, your balance sheet. Nobody really cares in the community like how you've done that work. You don't have to show your work, I guess, in entrepreneurship. Whereas when you're a
Yep.
corporation, it's all about showing your work. And in some cases, maybe even showing your work is more important than whether or not you got the right answer. For me, it's always output, output, outcomes. Did you succeed? Did you do what you say you're going to do? Did you learn? If you didn't, like, it's outcomes driven. So I don't like to show my work, I guess.
Yeah. That was the
I
same
think
way in school.
great,
I got the
great
right
line to,
answer.
yeah,
Yeah. Who
like,
cares
why?
how I got there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
Didn't
maybe want
cheat.
to, I maybe did not, I didn't cheat, and I maybe used a different way than what you taught me. But if I got the answer right,
Yeah.
why do we need
Who
to,
cares how I got it?
why do I need to lose half my marks? So I think that's
Yeah.
probably, there's something in there as well. It's like that piece. So I think in the right type of organization, I could do fine. I think in a senior leadership role, probably do fine where you had a lot of autonomy.
Yeah.
But I think, too much structure, process. If you had to show your work, I probably would struggle.
Fair. So we've already talked about a few different lessons, whether it be entrepreneurship or the story you shared. But anything else? Any other lessons we missed about your down but not out story, that event, and what you learned, either going afterwards, a year, 2 years, or what have you? Something you learned yesterday from that event.
And I think, for me, the only thing I would add is make sure you're taking care of your psychological self. I think I did not. I entered in. I have a personal therapist I started a relationship with in probably 2018, 2019, and definitely should have started that journey a lot earlier, because having, and it doesn't have to be like a therapist per se, but I think one of the things that I didn't pay enough attention to was the psychological damage that the stress was doing to me, and that it impacted family and other people as
Yeah.
well. And I thought I was doing a good job of managing the stress relative to the amount of stress that there was, and I actually think most people would agree I did pretty well given the total amount of the stress. And I think I could have handled it better and probably done less, psychological damage to myself and my family by handling that better. So entrepreneurship is an incredibly challenging ride. I think a lot of that does, like, there's nobody else really to blame at the end of the day, and that psychological stress. Am I good enough? Imposter syndrome. All those things become really challenging. So reaching out, RH Accelerator is an example of that type of network where you can reach out if you have questions or struggling. But also, I'd say I would not hesitate at all to recommend entrepreneurs, if day one of signing your incorporations, find a personal therapist,
Yeah.
because it's gonna be hard. And I think um, the more we can take care of the psychological safety of our founders, is even like you mentioned, that getting acquired piece, that can be incredibly stressful, and both outcomes are positive. You continue your business as is, or you get acquired by another company. Both outcomes, you're going to be great, you're going to be fine, but ultimately that stress is so hard because of the uncertainty. And am I making the right decision? Am I treating my staff fairly? Am I treating like, it's a lot to take on.
Yep.
So having some resources that you can lean on in times of psychological stress, and taking care of your own psychological safety. I was far more keen on taking care of our staff's psychological safety, and sort of, I think, emptied my bucket there, and wasn't paying attention to how empty my bucket was getting. So I think that would be the biggest takeaway is this is a hard journey if you're on it. I've talked to thousands of entrepreneurs. I don't think I've had one that's ever said, "Oh no, it's fine. I never lost a night's sleep." Right? Everyone goes through ups and downs. So making sure that you have to take care of yourself and your own mental health is the key thing that I wish I had done a little differently when the
I
big
think that's I
event
think
happened.
that's important for the output, right? If you're an output oriented person, not an input, then you can take a day off, ensure that maybe your input's down, but because you took that day off or you took that time for yourself, your output is going to be much better, right? If you can
Absolutely.
de-stress a bit, you can rest a bit. So I think that's really important. And something that people miss is, oh, I'm going to miss a day's worth of input. Yeah, but your output right now is garbage
Oh
because
yeah.
you're too stressed.
Yep.
You're in a terrible mental state right now, so you can't actually get a good output. You can't get your team going. You can't. So I think that's missed a lot, and a good point to make.
Yeah, and I'm like today. I did this because I like you and thought we'd have a great conversation. But technically, I'm off today, and that was literally because I recognized my own stress level. It was a really intense first quarter, like positive intense.
Yeah,
But I could tell I'm at that. Okay, I need a day to just decompress and go for a run, play some video games,
yeah,
chat with Nick, and that'll be my day, and it'll be much less stressful. I still did check my email and did a couple of banking things, but like no meetings, no whatever. So
yeah.
it is really
Uh,
important.
Let this be your therapy session for the week
It's
or
been
for the
good. A
month.
little bit of venting.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Um, and I think coming off of the last point, really coming off of that event that I had, I knew I was mentally drained as well, and I'm sure you felt that as the
Yep.
stress was like no other, right? When that cataclysmic event occurred,
Cataclysmic.
yeah,
Cataclysmic. There you go.
cataclysmic, yeah, there you go. You really, you're not. I think that's one of the worst mental states I was in right after, and a few months after, because it's almost, I don't know what shell shock is like, but I imagine it's close to that, right? Or some sort of PTSD. It's a very
Mhm.
tramatic experience,
It's
right?
dramatic. Yeah.
That you're going through, and then you have to cope with it, right? And part of that is
Yep.
ensuring that you're taking time off, you're looking after your mental health. Awesome. All right. That's all for this episode. Thank you, David Billson, for sharing your down but not out story.
Thanks, Nick. It's a pleasure to be here.
Cheers.
Bye.